Hello, I am Bob the Bookerer and welcome to my channel. Today I wanted to just talk about some books that I'm really excited about that are coming up this year, particularly early this year. And apologies as well for the lighting. I realise the last few videos have been quite dark. That is it's genuinely 2 p.m. as I film this, and I've got sort of like a ring light on me. But this is genuinely how sort of grim it is in the UK at the moment, both in terms of weather and just politically. Anyway, I wanted to talk about some books that I'm really excited about that are coming out. Particularly, some of these are ones that I have read already as advanced copies. Some I'm just sort of either have as advanced copies from NetGalley, or I'm hoping to read them soon in a sort of another way. But here are some of the ones that I'm really looking forward to. First up, January is a time when a lot of new books are released. And there are a few that I've been kind of keeping an eye on. So, To Paradise by Hanya Yanigahara, I've already spoken about, and I absolutely adored this book. I'm really excited for it to come out and for more people to have a conversation about it, because I think it's a brilliantly done book. It covers sort of multiple time periods and is really looking at kind of the idea of sort of never-ending pandemics, or how humans respond to pandemics and respond to sort of moments of national crisis or international crisis. And I think it's really cleverly done. The three sections of the book are about 100 years apart. So you've got sort of late 1800s, late 1900s and late 2000s, and it's really cleverly done, I think, and a really interesting change as well from A Little Life, which I also really enjoyed, but I think this is a very different book, and I really enjoyed both of them for very different reasons. Also, a writer, a non-fiction book by a writer who I've read before and really enjoyed, and that's Johann. And with this, he has a book that is all about focusing on why we cannot focus, essentially, hence the title of the book. And it sort of just looks a lot at, for example, attention spans, and not only how they've sort of been slowly waning over time, but how there are real reasons behind why that's sort of been kind of created that way. You know, companies are sort of vying for attention in various ways, and it's really important for them and for their sort of financial model for that to stay as it is. So I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was very well researched and very cleverly done, and I think he also avoided some some big pitfalls that we often find in books about attention, where it's kind of like social media is the problem, and it's like social media is part of the problem, but there is far more that goes on beyond that. And you know, it's very easy to just sort of put it in one. You're going to throw all your eggs in one basket and say it's all because of Facebook or whatever, but actually there's a lot more going on behind it, and a lot more about, for example, how our cities are structured, and a lot more about how our sort of day-to-day lives are structured with work and everything else that also feeds into the problem. And so I thought this book was really cleverly done for that reason. Another book that I am really excited about having more people kind of read is Out of the Sun by Esi Edugyan, and I hope I'm not completely butchering her name there. So she's sort of written 2 novels before, Washington Black and a book whose name escapes me right this moment, and I've not read either of them yet, but I am really keen to at some point, and partly as well because their book is shortlisted, so I will eventually have to come around to them. I say have to, I'm looking forward to them. But Out of the Sun is a collection of essays, and particularly looking at art and art history and sort of more global history, but that all intertwined with basically how ethnic minorities, and particularly how Black people have been treated within sort of various nations and various continents, through art and through other things. And so this book is really interesting because she's clearly done a lot of research and a lot of thinking, and it really weaves together a lot of parts that you wouldn't really expect to see all together. And so, for example, you've got things like she talks about, for example, Rachel Dolezal, you know, the sort of idea of sort of transracial identities. She talks about how sort of aspects of racism and sort of colonialism and sort of some stereotypes about people, particularly about Africans, were brought by colonizing powers, even to countries where they hadn't had any real experience of meeting African people. So in the case of Japan that she gives at one point, she talks about there being a set of people, you know, a set of Africans who lived in Japan, fairly harmoniously held kind of, you know, jobs and sort of roles within society that were, you know, quite broad. But then actually with the onset of slavery, how that brought some of these new stereotypes in, because now most of the black people who were being met by Japanese people were enslaved people, and so yeah, it sort of talks about that and really sort of start unpick. But if above all else, this book is just really interesting. It just sort of plays at it kind of brings together lots of threads of things that you wouldn't necessarily think about kind of combining, and she sort of writes her socks off for this, and I really enjoyed this book. Also, another non-fiction book coming out in February that I have really enjoyed recently is Laurie Penny, who is a sort of writer. She writes a lot about, particularly about feminism and about sort of queer rights. And in this book, she talks a lot about kind of how those sorts of, how kind of some of the current debates we're having, how some of the current discussions are basically a kind of a combination of things around the growing threat of fascism and various other things, and how that sort of dovetails in with some of the problems that we're currently facing. So I thought it was really, really interesting. There's also a little novella here that I found quite interesting, called Prosopagnosia, and I'm probably butchering that name entirely. And it's a really interesting little book. It's a tiny little thing. It's about maybe 80 pages or so. It's by Sònia Hernández originally and translated by Samuel Rutter, and it basically is about a sort of girl who, I think prosopagnosia is about not being able to recognize faces and not being able to really remember them fully, and it takes that idea and does something quite interesting with it, where this whole book feels like a very short artistic film almost, of a character who can't recognize faces, but then there are also a few things about mistaken identity and stolen identity sort of thrown in the mix. So really interesting as a kind of almost set piece that I really quite enjoyed. In March, there are two books that I'm really, really looking forward to. The first is a collection of poetry by Colm Toibin, and I believe this is his first poetry collection, called Vinegar Hill. And I adore Colm Toibin's writing from the few novels of his I've read, and I can't wait to see what that looks like in poem form. So very, very excited for that. And also Amy Liptrot with The Instant, which is a non-fiction sort of memoir book. So I'm currently reading, at time of filming, her memoir, The Outrun, which is a book that looks at nature and addiction. So she's sort of recovering from her alcoholism, and she is sort of using kind of going back home to the island of Orkney in Scotland to kind of help her really reconnect with life and with nature and with herself. And this is sort of the follow-up, where she leaves Orkney and goes to Berlin, and it's sort of a bit of a queer romp through Berlin in some ways as well. So I'm really, really excited to read this, just because I'm absolutely loving The Outrun at the moment, and fingers crossed The Instant is also just as good. In April, there are a few quite big releases as well, by authors who I love for many, many different reasons. The first being Young Mungo by Douglas Stuart. And I do have an advanced copy of this, so I'm very, very excited to read this. And, you know, I adored Shuggie Bain. I just thought it was an absolutely stunning piece of work. And I am really excited about Young Mungo. That looks like it almost feels like a sort of natural follow-up in terms of, not necessarily with the same characters, I believe, but, you know, in terms of exploring kind of young adulthood, and kind of a growing sense of kind of queer identity. And I'm so excited for this. And the cover, at least the UK cover, is fantastic and so wonderfully unapologetically queer that I'm here for it. I love this so much. So yeah, I cannot wait to read this. Next is one I have read. I was very lucky again to get an advanced copy of Time is a Mother by Ocean Vuong. So Ocean Vuong is sort of, he's a poet. He also wrote the sort of lyrical novel, I guess it is, which what is it called? There we go, called On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. I somehow always forget that title. And in April, he's releasing his next collection, which is called Time is a Mother. And apart from On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, I've read his poem collection Night Sky with Exit Wounds, which I adored and thought was beautiful. And the thing I love about Vuong is he is so good at bringing in very intelligent, clever metaphors that are just really profound, and he has a way of weaving together language that feels incredibly precise, but will kind of go from very sensual and lyrical to incredibly brutal in sort of, you know, just instantly. And Time is a Mother does this spectacularly, in my opinion. He talks in this book about a lot about his relationship with his mother, as you might expect from the title. And at one point there was a section in a longer poem towards the end that's a little bit more freeform. You know, the language almost breaks, and you know the lines almost break, and it kind of becomes this sort of almost stream of consciousness thing. And in it, he at one point has this thing where he sort of moves from talking about his mother to talking about seeking affection in his relationships with men. And he does it in just such a brilliantly profound way that I was just in a cafe. I was just sat in a little Costa Coffee in like near where I live after just having had my booster vaccine, literally just like weeping or like being close to weeping, trying to like hide it whilst being in this cafe, and sort of people randomly sort of walking past and, you know, having their little coffees, and there's me just being like, this is just so powerful. It's great. I will say. And yeah, really excited to read more of Ocean Vuong, and kind of go back and read a bit more of what he's written before, but really highly recommend Time is a Mother. It does some incredibly profound things in terms of how he talks about family and belonging and identity, and it's great. There's a wonderful part actually that I feel like sums up quite a lot of the collection, where he meets a woman who's sort of who is white and middle class, and she basically says, you're lucky that you're gay and Asian because that gives you something to write about, which, you know, is a ridiculous and insulting thing to say, but, you know, basically saying, you know, oh, you know, you come from a place of adversity, you've got like some topics to write about in poetry now. And he kind of has this sort of comeback in the poem, in that same poem, talking about how like he wishes he could sort of scrub the war, you know, the Vietnam War, from his sort of history almost, or like how he could not have that that sort of have to entertain some of those discussions, and in some ways the collection brings a lot of that together, of having these ideas of the sort of strands of his identity that have pulled together to sort of make something kind of happen, and it's beautiful. I just love it so much. Also in April, I believe, Ali Smith is releasing a companion piece, which is sort of a follow-up in some ways to the Seasonal Quartet. And this book is sort of a bit of a reflection on friendship and companionship and all those sorts of things, and how people pull together as a community. And, you know, it's Ali Smith. I'm pretty much going to read almost anything she writes anyway, but this just sounds like the right book at the right time. You know, it's been a tough year and a half, almost 2 years now. I think we probably need a book like this that sounds quite soothing, but also like it's going to shed some kind of new ideas on how to approach some of these things. And she's such a clever author anyway, that I'm sure she'll have something brand new to say about it all. And then finally, that takes me to June, and Andrew Holleran, who I keep on meaning to read Dancer from the Dance by him, which is sort of his sort of classic kind of queer novel. And he's got a new book coming out called Kingdom of Sand, which sounds really fascinating, and I'm really just keen to kind of, you know, he's such a sort of an established voice that I'm really excited just to read a little bit more and kind of hopefully go from there to kind of finding out a bit more. But early days as well. We're still only in January as I film this. So anyway, what books are you looking forward to? I'm sure there are many more by other authors that I have entirely forgotten as I'm going through this. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'm going to be busy reading quite a lot of advanced copies over the next couple of months, it seems, because I went on a bit of a splurge near the end of last year and have sort of shot myself in the foot slightly because I'm sort of sat there staring at about 20 advanced copies between now and June, just thinking like, oh gosh. At the same time, I feel very, very lucky to have them. It's just that I think I got a bit trigger happy with them. We'll see. Tune in next time to see if I have sort of managed to dig myself in another hole here in terms of giving myself too much to read. Anyway, what are you looking forward to, either from this list or other books that you know about that are coming this year? Really would love to hear your thoughts, and take care and speak to you all soon. Bye bye.